Good morning, everybody, and happy Monday. Welcome back to another Lunch Break Live with me, Ivana. I'm your host today, and always it is Lunch Break with Ivana. So it's good to see everybody, and today we've got a really interesting talk here. I'm really excited for it. This is Lauren Thompson. She is the director of the YWCA Central Alabama Domestic Violence Services. So Lauren is here to tell us about something that is a topic that unfortunately many people, men and women, both face. And this is a problem all the time, but there's a lot of factors in a pandemic that have exacerbated the problem for domestic violence victims and survivors. So Lauren is here today to give us a little bit of an overview about the services that the YWCA offers, but also tell us how coronavirus has changed that situation for a lot of people. So Lauren, thank you so much for taking some time to tell us about this, because this has been a topic that's been in the news about domestic violence during the time of a pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for hosting the YWCA Central Alabama today. We're really appreciative of the opportunity to get on here and talk about the services that we offer the community, the impacts that we're making in the community, and then raise awareness about the issue, the overall issue. And so first, I want to start by saying that the YWCA Central Alabama is dedicated to eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And in executing that mission, we offer domestic violence services. And so we offer a variety of services. First and foremost, we operate 2 emergency shelters in Jefferson County and St. Clair County. We also offer counseling services. We have therapists on staff that are able to do one-on-one counseling sessions with victims of domestic violence. In addition, we offer a victim support group where victims of domestic violence can come together and talk about some of the issues in a setting where they can relate to other individuals that are going through the same thing. We offer legal assistance and advocacy, and so we assist with family law issues and offer those civil legal remedies. So we assist our clients in filing for protection orders. We assist our clients in filing for divorce. We offer advocacy services. So we have advocates on staff that help our clients get through this process. We help them. I like to say that we don't give our clients a voice. We help them find their voice. And so we have a team of people that are dedicated to doing that. And then we offer safety planning for all of our clients. It's very important to realize that in these situations, we have to get creative, especially right now during a pandemic, in the ways that we help our clients stay safe.
Mm-hmm. Let me stop and ask you, you say your shelters, you have 2 emergency shelters, and they are remaining open during COVID?
Absolutely. So both of our shelters are open during COVID. Like I said, one is in Jefferson, one is in St. Clair. And so we do have shelters that are operational right now during the pandemic.
So some of your other services that you mentioned, there's a lot of them, luckily, for domestic violence victims. But how have those services been affected by just the pandemic in general, both financially and just resource-wise?
Absolutely. So one of the ways that we have seen probably the most significant impact in the services that we're providing is with the number of calls that we have received on our crisis line. And so just to kind of put things into context, so in 2019, we took a total of 2,014 calls. So that was in all of 2019. From January to present, we have taken 1,104 calls. However, since March, which is around the time that COVID started, so since March to present, we have taken 742 calls. So 742 of those 1,104 calls have happened between the month of March to present, July. And so we have seen that uptick in the number of clients that have been, number of victims that have been reaching out for services for domestic violence. And so not only do we see more victims that are reaching out, but from an agency standpoint, as you mentioned, we have both of our shelters that are operational during a pandemic. And like many other families are experiencing staying home, you have increased food expenses, you have increased utility expenses, you have increased supplies expenses. Never did we think that we would be having to buy a mask for every day of the week, but here we are. And so, some of these are the expenses that we are seeing as an agency and that our shelters are seeing is increased operational expenses when it comes to purchasing food for clients that are at the shelter, more than they would be before. And so yeah.
Right. It's looking in everybody who knows me and everybody who watches me knows that math is not my strong point. I'm not shy about that, but I was writing down these numbers that you were naming about the calls that your crisis line has received. And it looks like between March and now, you said there were 742 calls to that crisis line. And March, meaning kind of the beginning of when this pandemic hit us here in the U.S. and in Alabama. But that's a pretty large number compared to your last year calls, which were just a little bit over 2,000 for the entire year. So if you continue at this stage of 742 calls from March to now, July 13th, that could put you on track, it seems like, for a 2020 that has a lot more calls to that crisis line than in 2019.
Absolutely. And, like I mentioned, 742 of those calls have happened from March to present, or 742 of those 1,000, roughly, 1,100 calls have happened, since March to present. So as you mentioned, we are definitely on track to facing the possibility of surpassing that number because of
Right. And so let's break this down a little bit for people maybe who luckily have not ever had to think very much maybe about domestic violence, the statistics and rates. Somebody in the comments makes a good point saying people who are abusive, whether that's a man or a woman, is not, they don't need a time like this to be abusive. And that's right. You're correct. But the issue here, in something that we have heard about, is maybe why these numbers are ticking up, is because victims tend to be right now, with many office closures, loss of jobs, furloughs, tend to be at home with their abuser, who is also in that same situation of being at home.
Absolutely. So domestic violence doesn't stop for a pandemic. Domestic violence doesn't stop for holidays. Domestic violence is 24/7, 365. This is not an issue that discriminates. This is an issue that affects anyone and everyone. However, as you mentioned, we are seeing instances where victims are home more because either their hours have been reduced, they have lost their jobs due to COVID. We're just really not able to leave, home as often as we would have been able to before the pandemic. And also abusers are staying home. Maybe the abuser lost their job. Maybe the abuser had their hours reduced. And so we're seeing an increase in victims reaching out for services because they are finding themselves more at home more, whether it's because they are not leaving the house as often or their abuser is not leaving the house as often. So absolutely, domestic violence does not discriminate. However, we are seeing an uptick in calls for services because they're just, the violence is happening more frequently.
Well, and thanks for explaining that a little bit. Somebody, Sharon, makes a good comment saying that all these stress factors increases the stress factor with people with short fuses, and those who may already be abusive are maybe prone to react even more with violence as they get stressed. So that's a good point, Sharon. I think that kind of ties in with what you were saying, Lauren, about if your abuser is home all the time and then again may have lost their job, may be on furlough, pay cut, et cetera, all the things that a lot of us are experiencing right now. I want to circle back to and talk about these emergency shelters and the fact that maybe some people who are in an abusive situation where their abuser is at home, number one, they might not have the opportunity to leave as they would maybe when their abuser is out of the home for work or for anything else. Both that opportunity and also going maybe the fear of going to a crowded shelter where they will be around other people and could be exposed to coronavirus. How is your organization rather handling that situation?
Right. So, and that is one of the things that we explain to callers on our crisis line is that they are going to be coming into a communal living situation. And that's explained during a pandemic or, outside of a pandemic. It really, it's a reality. And so it's explained to the caller that they will be coming into a communal living situation. And so right now, in particular, we see that victims are faced with the decision of, do I stay with the issues that I know? Do I stay with the issues that I have been facing for X amount of time? Or do I put myself at a different kind of risk, and at times a greater risk, entering a communal living situation? And so some of the ways that we're handling that is not only are we explaining to the caller, these are your options, in addition to safety planning with them if they choose to stay home, and ways to stay safe at home, but as an agency, we are taking the proper steps and the precautions necessary to ensure that we are limiting exposure within our facilities and within our shelters in particular. We have staff that are dedicated to making sure that we are sanitizing, that we are enforcing, CDC guidelines. And so we do explain to callers that you are coming into a communal living situation. However, we are taking the steps necessary to make sure that we are providing not only a safe environment from abuse, but now that we find ourselves in the middle of COVID-19, a safe environment from potential exposure to, the COVID-19.
Are there regular sanitizing procedures happening at those shelters? Are there masks? I think you mentioned masks earlier. But how physically do you handle that when you have a group of people who are in a desperate situation and have to get to this facility? And I'm sure you're trying to make it as welcoming and comforting as possible. But at the same time, unfortunately, we are in this position where we have to worry about masks, sanitizing, social distancing. How do you physically do that?
Yeah, so our shelters, operate based on policies and procedures that we have, year round. And so there have been policies and procedures that we have had to create, because of the pandemic. But and you're right, we try to make the living situation as homey as possible, however possible that is, at a shelter, of course. And so but it's a lot of the things that a lot of us are facing. You're not really able to leave home, you're not really able to go out in public, you're not really able to do the things that you used to be able to do. And so our policies and procedures were created around that. We're created around, mandating that masks are always worn by clients and by staff, mandating that everybody remains 6 feet apart, mandating, that after a client uses, for example, the kitchen, everything is sanitized, staff assist in sanitizing the areas that are used. And so we really want to make sure that we are taking the steps that are necessary and recommended in order to make the shelter, a safe environment from COVID-19, so that victims that are in desperate need of these services feel like they left an already stressful situation, but are able to come in and feel safe because they're out of their abusive situation, but are able to come in and feel safe because they see staff that are taking the necessary precautions to make sure that exposure is limited.
See, looking at some of these comments, just so we can go back over those numbers, in between March and now, the calls to that crisis line operated by the YWCA, which the number is here in these comments. If you need it, that number is here. That has been over 742 calls from March till now, which is beginning mid-July. And it looks like that means that the organization is on track to beat's a bad word, but to go above the amount of calls that happened in all of 2019 this year. It looks like 2020 is going to be a higher year than 2019 for those crisis line calls. Are you seeing the same increase in people coming to your shelters? Do you have more victims that are saying, I need to get out, I need to be in the shelter? Or are you just seeing those calls rise?
So the calls vary in nature. However, a lot of those calls are calls for shelter. And so it just depends. For example, we can have callers that are saying, I need to come into shelter. They're accepted to shelter and, are referred to our shelter, accepted to shelter, and then don't actually follow through and come into our shelter. It varies. However, both of our shelters have been operating essentially at capacity, especially since COVID. Because there has been an increase of clients that have come into the shelter. Additionally, not just in addition to the calls, but the number of clients that have been reaching out for counseling services, our victim support group, our legal assistance, so it's not just exclusive to the shelters and not just exclusive to our crisis line. It really is just holistically all of our services. We have seen an increase in all of the services provided during COVID, and that again, mentioning that is because domestic violence doesn't discriminate. But during a pandemic that affects the home situation uniquely, we have had an increase in just overall services provided.
Let me ask you, you mentioned earlier about safety planning. Mm-hmm. And meaning you are telling people how to safely or as safely as possible live their life, unfortunately right now, maybe with their abuser with them all the time. What are some of the things that you say in these safety planning guidelines, or what are some of your top tips for a person who unfortunately maybe is at home all the time with their abuser right now?
Right. So, and just to mention that safety planning is something that we provide in every facet of the services that we provide, at YWCA. And so, so safety planning includes things like creating a plan, and this would be between a victim and their advocate, but it's essentially creating a plan on how to stay safe. What do I do if this happens? What do I do if this doesn't happen? What do I do in an explosive incident? What do I do if the violence escalates? And so some of the things that we recommend our clients to do is to make sure that they have a plan. They have notified, for example, and this is just an example, a neighbor. My neighbor knows what's going on, and so my neighbor knows that when I need something, I'm going to leave the porch light on or something. Or my neighbor knows that when my abuser's car is, in the driveway, if they haven't heard from me for X amount of time, then they know something is wrong. And so essentially, safety planning is a way to plan around the violence so that perhaps the victim is able to leave the situation or remain safe in an abuse like a situation of escalated violence. And so safety planning is a way for us to communicate to our clients, our callers, these are some of the ways that you can stay safe. These are some of the things that you can maybe store away in case you have to make a quick escape. These are some of the resources that we offer. That is definitely part of safety planning, is talking to our callers, on the crisis line about the resources in the community, about our services, so that they know that that's always an option. And so safety planning is definitely something that is customized to the person. It's not something that is just done, in general. It is something that is customized based on that person's situation, based on what they are going through. Another thing to realize, in addition to safety planning, is that domestic violence is not just physical violence. It includes verbal and emotional, psychological violence. And so oftentimes safety planning, you have to get creative, because it's not just safety planning around physical incidents, it's safety planning around verbal incidents, verbal and emotional incidents that could potentially lead to physical violence. But domestic violence is not exclusive to physical violence. It includes other forms of violence that lead us in the profession to have to get creative in the ways that we safety plan with our clients.
Getting one comment from Heather saying that they've lost 7 women in her county to domestic violence. So sorry, Heather, and y'all, we're definitely thinking about y'all. And if you or anybody needs help, please reach out to that information. Lauren, why don't we actually take this time to say, if anybody needs help with a domestic violence situation, how can they get help from you guys?
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that, Heather. And that is one of the things about domestic violence, is that oftentimes the situation can become lethal and end in a fatality. And so that is why safety planning, for example, is so important. Reaching out for services is so important. And if anybody needs assistance, if anybody is experiencing domestic violence, if anybody knows somebody that is experiencing domestic violence, we do have a 24/7, 365 confidential private crisis line that can be called, and it's 322-HURT, which is 322-4878, and that's going to be posted in the comments. Additionally, in addition to the YWCA's crisis line, there is also a national chat line that you can text, and that is you can text 22522 or you can text Love Is to 22522, excuse me, or you can go to the hotline.org, and it's the national hotline, and it's a chat option that is also private, secure, and confidential, in addition to the YWCA's crisis line that is also available. And it's very important to recognize the signs of domestic violence, whether you are in the situation or somebody in the situation. And so sometimes what that can look like is, for example, manipulation, isolation, coercion. Isolation, for example, maybe you used to be able to talk to your family. Maybe you used to be able to talk to your friends, and maybe your abuser no longer lets you do that. That's a way of maintaining control in the relationship. That's the way of limiting your support and your essentially your social network, so that you can reach out for help. Using the children against you, manipulating you to think that you are the reason why this is happening, and that is absolutely false. Nobody deserves this. Nobody asks for this, which is why I mentioned that domestic violence is not just physical violence, it's also verbal, emotional, and oftentimes we see economic abuse. We see clients all the time that come through our doors that have never worked a day in their life because their abuser has never allowed them to work a day in their life. Or we have clients that come through our doors that work but have to basically give their paycheck over to their abuser. So any kind of red flags, we encourage everyone to seek out help, and that is often the hardest thing to do, taking the first step and reaching out for help. The most dangerous time for an individual to leave a relationship, in an abusive relationship, is when they leave the relationship. That is oftentimes when most of the fatalities occur. And so taking that first step and reaching out for services, reaching out, making the call and just seeing what's out there. We see calls like that all the time, where we have clients who maybe are not ready to, callers who are not ready to follow through with services, but are starting to realize that what's happening is not okay and is not normal. And
right.
Love shouldn't hurt. And so, taking that first step and making the call is crucial in making that change.
Right. And just to clarify too, I know that your organization is the YWCA, but men and women are welcome to call that line.
Absolutely. So we serve just any individual that is needing assistance with in reaching out for services, for domestic violence. Like I said, domestic violence does not discriminate. Domestic violence does not pick a gender. Domestic violence does not pick a particular situation. Domestic violence affects anyone and everyone, and so our services are available for both men and women. Just any individual that is affected by this. By these forms of violence, and like I was saying, one of the things that I really would like for everyone to understand, and I keep repeating myself when I say this, because we hear this a lot in the profession. Well, they didn't hit me. Domestic violence is not just physical. Again, it is being put down. It's being called names. It's being told that you're not worth anything. It's being made to believe that you're something that you're not. It's being manipulated. It's being coerced. And so I just want to make sure that everybody understands that it's not just because you were not physically injured that you are not being abused.
Well, and quickly, thank you for that clarification, because I think that is probably a very common thought, and one, unfortunately, that your organization probably deals with a lot. Let me quickly address, we have one domestic violence, it seems like, survivor in our comments. Lauren, good for you. We're all very proud of you. And that's awesome that you have gotten yourself out of that situation. So, and everybody, if there are other people watching and you've gotten yourself out of that situation, good for you. If you haven't, we are putting that information if you need help with a domestic violence situation. If you were a victim, a survivor, and you need help, that information's in these comments, and you can reach the YWCA's services there. So, Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today, giving us some information about this really important topic that sometimes gets overlooked. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. For everybody watching, thank you so much for watching. We will see you tomorrow for Election Day. So we'll have a lot coming for you tomorrow. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.